All right, welcome everyone back to Rocks for Jocks. So I'm here with some breaking news about earthquakes today. There was a mid-sized earthquake off the coast of Maine in New England. The reason that this is so exciting was because earthquakes in this part of the country rarely get big enough to even be felt by anyone more than a few miles away. So in New England, we get a lot of really small earthquakes. We might get 3 or 4 really small earthquakes a week that either are felt by 0 people or only felt by a handful of people. Rarely do get anything bigger than about 2.5 magnitude. The earthquake this morning was off the coast of York Harbor, Maine. It was originally marked as a 4.1 magnitude and then later downgraded to about a 3.8. That in itself is interesting, where the initial estimate is usually given by some sort of automated computer system. The reason for that is that they want to get these values out to the public as soon as possible, even if it's just a rough ballpark. And then soon after any major events happen, there are usually employees that are able to jump online and do the proper calculations or adjust any measurements that the computer made automatically from the incoming data streams. So I had a couple friends reach out and basically ask me, how big of a deal is this kind of event? Does it matter? Are people going to get hurt? Do buildings get damaged with this level of event? The way I described it is it's a small to medium-sized deal. So it is definitely notable enough to want to be talked about by people who care about earth science like myself, and hopefully some of the public. And probably some minor studies are going to be done on it. So what that means is some universities are going to get funding to check out the shaking pattern, or maybe check out the fracture pattern in the rock and try to learn something cool out of those. But it's not going to be considered any kind of historical earthquake for people to look back on. There's not going to be any major damage. There's not going to be bridges falling over or houses falling over and killing people. Now, there may be cases of small damage happening. You might have some framed pictures fall off the wall if your house is really close to where the event itself happened. Now, the shaking does get dispersed over space. So if you are 100 kilometers from the event, you're going to feel it a lot less than if you are 10 kilometers from the epicenter of the event. For example, I am living down near Boston, and I absolutely felt the shaking, which was super exciting for me, but not nearly enough shaking to have any kind of serious damage. It was just enough for me and my cat to sit up and take notice, which was pretty funny because she had no idea what was going on. So there are 2 websites that I want to take a look at today. The first is going to be the Weston Observatory, owned by Boston College, and the graphs that they have and what they're working on. And then the second is going to be the USGS, US Geological Survey, Earthquake Hazards Program. So the first is the Weston Observatory, as I mentioned, is part of the New England Seismic Network. So that's basically a network of, I think, 20-something stations spread out across New England. Now, they are probably more concentrated in populated areas than they would be otherwise, but we do the best we can do, and we don't always have geologists living perfectly spread distance apart from each other. So what we're looking at here is going to be some of the earthquake shaking data from a seismometer at the Weston Observatory. A seismometer is just a fancy instrument for measuring how much shaking you feel at a given location. So the best component that they have available for the public to view is going to be this vertical component, and specifically this dark green chunk in the middle is going to be where it actually started. You can see kind of a sharp cutoff at both the top and the bottom, which I think just means that it was shaking so much that it basically went off the charts. The reason that this smallish to mid-sized earthquake looks like it's going off the charts is because the rest of the shaking that happens on a normal basis needs to be shown large enough where we can actually see what's going on and potentially track smaller and smaller events. So if we scaled down the size of these waves, for example, so that this 3.8 event could all fit on screen, we would not be able to easily track the smaller events. Magnitude 2.0 would be totally beyond range for a human to see. So part of my job when I was working here was to really dig into these graphs and find those tiny, tiny earthquakes and log them as best I could. If you're interested, you can also flip through here and check out some of the other stations. So another one that I thought was interesting is this EMMW is up in Maine. It is up at the University of Maine at Machias. Okay. And they also, as we can see, recorded that giant, well, what appears to be a giant 3.8 magnitude event. The other things we can take a look at, the channel selector at the bottom is currently set to BHZ, which I just know from working there means the vertical component. The other ones are BHE, is east and west, and BHN means north-south. For a lot of these stations, they're not 100% kept up to date on the website, so you might not be able to see a lot of this, like really specific data if you dig into it. But vertical should be available at pretty much every station, I think. The frequency is another case of that. Earthquake shaking waves, you can get different number of waves per second depending on what your part of the earthquake shaking you're trying to look for. So a short period is most common, I believe, to just track the main events that are happening. Long period and broadband are probably not going to be kept up to date with this website. There's a really small group of people running this, so they do the best they can. And I can say that confidently because I used to work there. All right, so go back to short period just so we can see some cool stuff. And if you want, you can go back in time and check out some other days. The earthquake list is another good place to be able to take a look at some of the prior events that have happened recently, depending on how up to date this might be. I don't know exactly how frequently the website gets updated, but I know that when I was there, we were tracking 3 to 4 really small events a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, of course, just depending on how the earth was shifting that week. This is pretty cool too. You can see where the seismic stations are that we're tracking. So for example, the Weston Observatory seismic station, I think is this one here. Yeah. And that is going to be really close to where the event happened. That was off in this little corner of Maine, kind of close to the New Hampshire border. All right, so moving on to the USGS website. This is a giant, sprawling website with a ton of really cool information. So I'm going to get through as much as I can, at least highlight some of the big stuff that I enjoy. And yeah, we'll take it from there. So this can be accessed in a couple of different ways. The USGS, US Geological Survey website itself is huge and has a ton of people and departments under it. I always get lost trying to find the Earthquake Hazards Program, so I end up just Googling USGS earthquakes, and this is always going to be the first thing that pops up. So pull open this website, and you can spend some time bumming around if you want. There's a ton of really cool news articles and visualizations and journal articles you can take a look at. So the part that I want to highlight today is going to be the latest earthquakes. All right, so this is showing magnitude 2.5 and up earthquakes in the past 24 hours, starting with the view of the United States, but really easy to move around here, zoom in and out. So what I'm going to do here is change this filter to 30 days, magnitude 2.5 up. The point I'm trying to get across here is that if you look at all of the mid-sized to large events, we see that they are, at least in North America and Central America, we get a lot kind of along the West Coast, and then a handful down kind of along the Rockies, and then a bunch of others kind of in the Texas, Oklahoma region. The New England earthquakes themselves are pretty rare to get anything over 2.5. So in the last 30 days, we only have this single event off the coast of York Harbor, Maine. One more thing I wanted to point out before I leave is if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of this left-hand side, you can hit download. I think you want to right-click, download linked file. Well, you won't be able to see on the screen, but what that shows is time, latitude and longitude, magnitude, depth, and some other statistics for every single one of those events that is on that list all across the world. And then, of course, if you change the filter settings on the right-hand side and then hit download again, you can get totally different data sets. So the star of the day is going to be, again, this 3.8 magnitude off the coast of Maine. So then once you click into this, you can get a lot more information on that individual event. Now here we have an overview of the full event. My favorite things to take a look at are going to be the interactive map, did you feel it, shake map. All right, so this interactive map here shows us a couple of different things. We can mess around with the background layers. Personally, I love the satellite imagery, aerial, so I'm always gonna go with that. And here up first, we have the MMI contours, which is gonna be the Modified Mercalli Intensity Scale. In other words, we're taking a look at how much shaking was felt by people on the ground. And for example, did you feel the ground shaking? Did you feel your house shaking? Did any framed pictures fall off the wall? Did, I don't know, anything get knocked over? Did your house fall over? Did a bridge fall over? All kinds of reports and data goes into that to try to ascertain how much shaking you actually felt. Some of the data that might go into that is if there's any areas of softer soils, we can expect those to propagate the shaking waves and feel them, if you're on the surface, a lot more. The other thing that I love from this is you can check out PGA and PGV, which are going to be peak ground acceleration and peak ground velocity. And those are going to be used for any kind of earthquake studies that use shaking data. So for example, in the master's thesis that I did, I was trying to figure out how much PGA affected a secondary hazard of earthquakes called liquefaction. So I spent a lot of time downloading the PGA data sets and trying to figure out what was going on there, where the liquefaction happened with respect to high areas of PGA or low areas of PGA. All right, over to the Did You Feel It map. So the Did You Feel It product is basically a publicly sourced part of this website, and it shows what kind of modified Mercalli intensity people were feeling based on their actual responses to the earthquake shaking. I actually got the chance for the first time to submit a Did You Feel It report today, and see if I can pull this up, see what kind of questions it asks. I had to fill in address, where I was standing, what floor I was on, was I asleep, did other people feel it, how would I describe the shaking, that kind of thing. And then you get this publicly sourced map with, you can see the closest block to the epicenter had 6 responses, just because this is a sparsely populated area. But we get a lot of other responses, a few hundred in some of these blocks nearby, which I thought was pretty cool. And then once we get down to Boston area, around where I live, you can see 833 responses, 3,000 responses. So we are almost 100 kilometers away, but we did get a lot more people reporting because it's so much more densely populated out here. You can even dig into some more of the ways to view the data here of how far away we are from the epicenter of the event versus what kind of intensity people reported feeling, which I think is pretty cool too. And then lastly, we have a shake map, which is going to be more ways of viewing things like peak ground acceleration and peak ground velocity, which are then used in other types of models to estimate liquefaction or estimate landslides or any other kinds of damage that earthquake might cause. Oh, this is pretty cool. I have not seen this before. So yeah, I guess we're looking at prediction of peak ground acceleration versus what these seismic stations actually felt. And it looks like the prediction is this purple line with plus or minus 1 standard deviation around it. So what that means is that we expect most of the stations to be within 1 standard deviation of the prediction. But it looks like something else is going on here, where the Did You Feel It responses are showing higher intensity than what was predicted. And even some of the seismic stations, which record the shaking directly from the ground, look like they're showing a little bit more intensity than what was expected. All right, I'm sure people are going to dig into this over the next couple of months and try to figure out what's going on here and why the shaking was more intense than predicted. And then one more thing I wanted to point out just while I'm on it is there's even a tab for an aftershock forecast, which I've not seen before. They do a good job of reminding you if you feel earthquakes shaking in the future, just drop and try to get away from any falling materials if you can. But luckily, when we're talking about New England earthquakes, they're usually very, very tiny. So you're not going to feel them very much, if at all. Especially these aftershocks we're talking 2% of anything magnitude 4 and up, 13% of anything magnitude 3 and up over the next week. So probably going to be safe in New England. That is all I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. If you like this, please subscribe and give it a like. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.